With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Hey, welcome to the Exploring More podcast with Michael Thompson. Just wanted to take a minute to say thank you to all of our listeners. It's been an incredible year. We are a year old, just over a year old, SJ, on our podcasting. And to date, we're being listened to in over 50 plus countries.
Yeah, more than 50.
32,000 unique downloads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exciting. So as we turn into Christmas, we just wanted to give back, give some more, give an opportunity to our podcast listeners to get a free gift. And you can go to Zoweh.org/podcast gift, where we've taken 5 audio recordings from our conferences, which I want to talk about just for a second. In the new year, 2020, we have 4 very incredible conferences where we would love to see and meet and engage in the journey with you, podcast listeners. So you can check out all the events page on the Zoweh.org website and see the events for the Women's Weekend in the fall, the Heart of a Warrior event in the spring, another one in the fall.
Out in Colorado.
And in the mountains of Virginia. And these are just places that we would love to create an environment for you to connect with God and to make some new friends. Zoweh's got a couple new books. Robin and my daughter Ashley have been working on a women's book that is going to be published sometime in the spring, early summer next year. And then I've been working the last couple years on a new book for men that we'll also publish. So yeah, we look forward to letting you know more about that. We're going to talk more about that on the podcast. Mm-hmm. But this time of year is really important to all nonprofits. And so we're praying for all the different front lines missions that are out there and the fuel and the resources that they need. And if you want to support, if you can support Zoweh, we would so appreciate you as a monthly partner or an end of year gift. Yeah. And you can go to the Zoweh website, Zoweh.org, and /give and hit the give tab or /give and make a contribution. Yeah. We need that. We need that support. We need those finances to continue to do what we're doing and to continue to expand our reach and our influence for the kingdom, in the kingdom, and your partnership would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, we're hearing more and more stories every day of men and women being impacted by this message of more love, more life, more freedom. And so if you want to provide more bullets or more bandages or however you want to look at we're in a battle.
The war effort needs you.
That's right.
So from all of us at the Exploring More podcast, SJ and myself, we want to say Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We pray you're all blessed beyond measure and love being on this journey with you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, we'll jump right now into our Exploring More podcast. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. And I'm here in the studio with Greg Sailors, Jim Cheney, and SJ Jennings. And we are descending into the end of year and in some ways kind of taxing the runway for 2020. I don't know if it's crazy to say that, but it feels that way, that I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. And yet you men know.
We have a vision for 2020.
Right? God has, we were talking about it quite a bit for the last several weeks, and we've been organizing and having conversations and then publishing that with our friends and allies, a lot of our alumni. Yeah. I think back to January of this year, 2019, there was an event that happened in Masculinity. There was a commercial that was released by Gillette. Is this the best a man can be? And went viral.
Right. If for a moment,
viral bold, it went wild. And it was embraced deeply, but it also offended greatly. There were opponents to it for a variety of reasons. And Greg, you're coined, it's a t-shirt someday. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But man, did people hear what they weren't saying.
Or what they wanted to hear.
In that Gillette piece. And then it was followed up by a couple weeks later, Agard, is that how you pronounce it, I think?
I think so, yeah. Watch company, EGARD.
Yeah. German?
French.
Agard.
Agard.
Swiss.
Yeah. So they, but they had another
Somewhere in Europe.
spin on it in masculinity. It was another side, I think, of the same coin.
Yeah, response.
And both attempting to point towards what it is to be a man, what the masculine journey looks like, what it is. And my point, brothers, in bringing it up, it was probably one of the most significantly spotlighted moments on masculinity for me and for us when we looked at millions of views and the comments.
Yeah, the comment section.
That went from plus 10 to minus 10.
Sad, heartbreaking, brutal, like, wow.
Encouraging, thankful, blessing. So I bring all that up to transition to this thing that now we're here December, and it's the thought that we're not losing the war on masculinity particularly. We're not losing the war. We've lost. And with a loss like this, going back to January and the disparity between these commercials, this production and statements that they were trying to make, it just showed how perceptions are then translated into comments, and comments then put on these news and media. Our guy that we watched, Jordan Peterson's had a voice at this table. Chris on Fox News, who has interviewed one of the, I can't think of it right now, but he did a special. He did a couple sessions on toxic masculinity and true masculinity.
Start with a T, his name, Tucker.
Yes,
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson. It was Carlson. Yeah, it was Tucker Carlson. Listeners and brothers at the table, I bring it up because there are times during the year where our team is very, very sobered to the war and the ground that's been lost and the position in which we find ourselves fighting from. Yes, we know in the kingdom of God that we are victorious, but we also look at the landscape and we, I think, have a front lines position to see how bad it is out there. We're not talking necessarily about believers, just in general, the culture, the society. As John Eldridge said one time earlier this year, or I saw it published anyway, this is a hard time to be a man. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not trying to raise...
You're not whining.
No. And my point is what men are doing and what men are doing to women, what men are...
Most of it's not helping.
Come on. Yeah. We are living in very dark times when it comes to what it is to be a man, what men offer, how they are absolutely not able to come out of consumerism and into provision, because there is a darkness that has targeted men over the last 4 decades, maybe the last 10. This has been going on. But I think right now, missionally, we see so many men in POW camps, so many men compromised by pornography, so many children and families affected by divorces. And it's not always the men's fault. I'm not saying that.
No.
But the confusion surrounding what it is to be a man and the voice that we're attempting to be in that battle and in that war and in that conflict, we're part of a remnant. Yeah. We're part of a group of men who will not accept defeat. And we know there's other allies out there, kind of like Star Wars. I go back, this has spanned 40 years now, right? Star Wars.
Rebels or the resistance.
The resistance, right. We are not in the majority of any kind of conversation now about what good men look like, what masculinity, the strength and the tenderness, a fierceness against evil, and a willingness. I mean, and men are trying. I get that. I am not saying we're not, but we have lost so much ground in what it is to be wholehearted, what it is to have your identity secure in the kingdom. Fathers and grandfathers passing down to their sons and daughters, belovedness.
And it's not just what we see in popular culture, Michael. It's easy to see the Egard commercial or the Gillette commercial and see the things that are happening across the landscape of our modern culture. But we see it in the church too. We have a first-hand seat, front row seat rather, of seeing what's happening with our churches, with Christian men that are confused too. And at our weekends, and we see it in the impact sheets, we see it in our medic appointments that we have our time with Jim. Men are hurting, and we have the great privilege of hurting with them.
And bringing the bandages.
And being able to bring the bandages, that's right.
And bringing the encouragement and bringing the questions, what happened to you?
Yeah, and we often say, right, if men are the problem, then what?
We believe, yeah.
At least they'll be part of the solution.
But they have to get their hearts back.
They do.
And statistics are they are what they are, right? We use them sometimes to prove why we exist or what we're doing. And yet, goodness, I wish we weren't in the business that we're in. Many days, it's awful.
There's just incredible confusion about true masculinity. I mean, you used a term a couple minutes ago, fierce masculinity. Well, it's easy to get confused about that, right? I mean, your book calls us warriors. But I love the definition that you give at the beginning of the book from Sitting Bull. I'm paraphrasing, but a warrior is not someone who takes a life. A warrior is someone who protects a life, someone who can't protect their own self.
Yeah, I've heard it too said, a warrior is not the one that fights against what's in front of him, but he protects what is behind him.
Yeah. That's what we mean by fierce masculinity.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That there's a strength in settledness, Prince of Peace.
Yeah. Love.
And love.
Yeah.
And a fierce, loving presence when a man could be on the scene. And we see that in Jesus's life. I mean, he's not only our model and our poster, he's our king.
Yeah, and he's the Prince of Peace, but he's not a pacifist.
No,
right?
And it seems like that's another element, like you said, Jim, of where there's confusion, what he's like. In writing and working on King Me, I am, again, amazed at what we've lost and what the enemy has done to create even a picture of Jesus as something less than our greatest ambitions to become.
That's so good. Mm-hmm.
And how cool, how awesome, how funny, and how pointed he can be at walking me into who I am in the kingdom.
He's spiritually fierce. He's spiritually a warrior, not physically necessarily.
Yeah, so before we move into the answer, let's wrap up, the question or the problem.
Yeah, some of these statistics.
Yeah, something you just wrote recently, Michael, for our latest newsletter was the enemy of our hearts inflicts pain and destruction to every single man, woman, family, and child in the world without remorse, without pity, and without discrimination. And we see that in the statistics that are in this newsletter too. 80% of all suicide victims are men. 25% of children live in a home without a father. So 1/4 of all of the children in the United States live in a home without a father. 55% of women are abused in a relationship before they reach the age of 25. 79% of victims of homicide committed by an intimate family member are women. 45% of all marriages end in divorce. 40% of 11 million single parents are divorced. So 100% of people do not make it through the journey of life unscathed.
Right.
Yeah, and these are just some of the statistics that made our cut. You know, we had
there's
talks about
plenty of them. Yeah.
You know, a good 20 more probably that were around that we didn't choose.
Yeah. This is going to sound accusatory, and it's more frustration and a cry for help and for waking up. As indicting as this sounds, I'm going to still try to not make it indicting, but where's the church? Where are our men's initiatives in the church? Why is this not the most important thing in churches across America? If this is the statistics, and we know that amongst believers, the pornography rates, the divorce rates, this is not apples and oranges. Believers, kingdom men are suffering under the hands of the evil one who has moved hell to take men apart at the earliest of ages so that he can get the most mileage out of what's been inflicted on the masculine heart. And we're talking about masculine hearts, but I do not want to escape the reality of women and what's happened to them, for goodness sakes. The enemy seems to understand how this works better than the church. That's what I want to say.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to say it. Yeah. And that statement either makes you mad as a listener to hear that.
It makes me mad as
I just mean
as a man.
and you want to come
as a man.
You want to come to the defense of your church, right? or it makes you nod and say, yeah, where's the church been? But either way, the point is something's got to be done.
Yeah.
Something's got to be different.
Yeah.
Because you're either going to sit on your hands and do nothing and say, well, what can you do? Or you're going to move into action. And what we're saying is that this is a war that's been lost. We won a few battles along the way, yeah, but the war has been lost. And so are we going to just give up and live under the rule of this evil empire, or are we going to continue to rebel?
Yeah, and find friends and allies along the way who won't stand for it, won't sit for it. And if you are a part of a church, like you said, SJ, I'm not apologizing. I'm saying if you're a part of a church that your men's ministry budget is larger than your children's ministry budget, then you call us and we will have you on this podcast.
I've never met anybody like that.
Never.
If investing in men beyond the Sunday morning service
Or the Friday morning breakfast.
and the once a month pancake
Fixing
breakfast,
the widow's porch.
I mean, this is going to take a reformation of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not talking about revival. I mean, that too.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean a reforming of the lines, a reforming of the mission. And that's what God has burdened our hearts with. Our shoulders bear this.
He's
We
given us
feel-
authority in this area,
We feel
too.
strongly.
I was so moved
about
by
this.
that, Michael, and I texted you about it a few days ago about reforming the lines, about the remnant. A lot of this came up as we were preparing for our time with those 5 visits with the North Carolina Baptist in November, and we were thinking, what would we say if we had the opportunity to speak to these men? And that idea of reforming the line, I think is so true. I think it's true for our churches, Jim. I think it's true for folks that are just men in their own communities, their own households, is we have to go back and do an inventory. Where is our heart? What's God done? What has happened
What's
to
the
us?
damage, right?
Yeah, let's do a diagnostic.
Any disaster, and this is one.
Right.
You have to have some analysis of what is the damage.
We go in for a checkup to the doctor once a year, a physical, right? What is the diagnostic? What's going on with us? What's going on with our church's men group, or lack thereof, or wherever we are in a movement of men? If men are part of the problem, if they're going to be the solution, they have to do a diagnostic and they have to really reform the lines to move the remnant forward.
And this is across denomination lines. I mean, you said the Baptists, but
we talk to Presbyterians.
Oh,
It doesn't matter who you talk to. These statistics are not church statistics.
No.
Yeah, this is
But they
country.
are true in the church.
Yeah.
You hear people say that all the time with disdain and, well, how come the divorce rate is 45% outside of the church and inside the church?
Yeah.
Well, this is what we're talking about.
And it's funny, I got asked about that particular statistic and why it seems to have gone down from 50-ish%. It's because people aren't getting
People aren't
married.
getting married.
No, cohabitation
So that's
is on the
that's
rise.
why the number, that's an asterisk
Official.
to the number.
Mhm.
But I want to say, Greg, we get a call from a church in Florida, 10,000 members. They called us because within a month, they had 2 major initiatives in their church, right? 10,000 members is what you told me.
Yep.
The women had 2,000 women attend their event.
Right.
The men had
Few
400,
400, I
is
think,
what
yeah.
I saw in the email, 400. And that happening within a few months of each other in a church, the church leadership, the pastors, somebody noticed, that's not right.
Yeah, that was a red flag.
Something's wrong.
Yep.
How can that be? And there's not a simple answer, or we wouldn't have these statistics.
That's right.
And so as we explore this and walk with this, with God in this, and as we're men who, for reasons I think such as this podcast and today, over a decade, God has dug us out of some of the pits and some of the things that encumbered us and got in the way of being loved by God and seeing those things steadily being removed, especially those first couple years. If there's anything that has brought our friendship into friendship, it's been the common denominator of that, pursuing wholeheartedness and finding the commonality of you too, I am too. Let's walk together. Let's see what we'll discover together. Let's do this together. I can't think of anything more significant in what's put us around the table today than the last decade of Me Too.
Yeah.
Oh, man, you feel that way too?
Right. I
Yeah.
thought I was the only one. Yeah. So as you can tell, listeners, we're pretty passionate about this. And if you think we're passionate about the problem, wait till you hear the second half of this podcast and we talk about the solution.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break and come back and talk about how we believe there's hope. Exploring More podcast listeners, I want to take a second and let's talk with Greg and Jim about Zoe Allies while we have a minute. What's going on in that arena, guys, and how do guys get connected?
Thanks, Scott. I'm sure you guys have heard by now how important you are to us, you allies or potential allies, so thank you for that. We want to keep in touch with you, to communicate with you regularly, so we are planning on having a monthly allies call, kind of a fireside chat where we can share what's going on at Zoweh and you can share what's going on with your allies group. And then probably every 6 weeks or so, we'd like to have a Facebook Live. We've done both these in the past. I think many of you are familiar with them. There's more information about them. There will be more information about them on our new website in January.
Greg, talk a little bit about what an ally is. I mean, has that got to be a guy that's leading a huge group of guys? I mean, what's an ally?
Thanks, Scott. It can be a church or a ministry that has a group of men that meets. It can be an individual, and it can be where two or more are gathered, Scott. And it's where redemptive friendships are created, environments are created for that to happen. One of the places we love to do that is on this website, where we've created for you a place to be able to be known and to know. And so if you are in New Mexico and looking for a group, or you're in Spain and looking for a group, we'll have links on there to people that are close to you. We're excited about keeping you updated and resourcing you there on our new website. And if you go there as well, you can join our Allies Dispatch, which is a mailing that happens every few months to tell you about all the things that are coming up at Zoweh, and then some of the things that are happening, as Al Roker would say, in your neck of the woods.
So there's also a Facebook group, right? Zoe Allies, but do they have to approach you about joining? How do they find that on Facebook?
Yeah, if you go to our Facebook page for Zoweh, which is Zoe Life, if you look up Zoe Life on Facebook, you can look there in the side bar and you'll see where we have a group. And we have actually two. We have Warrior Up, which is more of a devotional group that Bob Chatterton leads for us, and then Zoe Allies, which is a place where allies come and talk about life and what's going on in the kingdom.
Hey, so to paraphrase our friend Haynes Maxwell, if you're going to war, you better know who your allies are and where they are. And so we want to encourage all of you men out there, and women too, if you're looking to get connected with others that are looking to fight for the hearts of others as you fight for your own heart, we just want to connect with you and be in relationship with you and support each other however we can. So check out www.zoe.org/allies, and also look for our Zoe Allies group on Facebook through our Facebook page, Zoe Life. Hope to see you there.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast, where we're fired up.
Come on, man.
A little bit fired up.
If that don't light your fire, your wood is wet, right? Isn't that what they
That's
say?
right.
We're fired up about what God's up to, and
it's easy to talk, SJ, about the problem.
And about the problem.
Man.
That's not where
we just want to give context to the rest of this podcast, right?
Yes. And missionally, we have found maybe 4 corners of a mission for us. Would love for each one of you just to talk about what's our hope and answer. What are we doing as a team and as a mission and ministry? What are the things that we believe are hope and hopeful?
I mean, the name of our ministry is Zoweh,
right?
Which is from John 10:10, right? The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I, Jesus, have come that you would have life and have it to the full. So that Greek word for life is Zoweh, and that's where the name of our ministry comes from. So the answer is the full and abundant life that Jesus has promised, right?
Right.
The mission is wholeheartedness,
right,
so that you can experience the full and abundant life.
Those statistics, there is an absence of wholeness, an absence of life. And so it's easy to see the statistics and to see the carnage and to see the POWs and to see the brokenness and the brokenheartedness. And Jesus enters the story, right? John 10:10, I came that you might have life. You go to Luke 4 and he announces his ministry, sight for the blind.
Bind up the brokenhearted.
Heal the brokenhearted and set captives free. That's what Jesus is doing. And unfortunately, right, brothers, business is still good.
Yeah. There's no lack of opportunity.
There's plenty of opportunities. But when we see a heart move at these 4 corners, these pillars, we start to see men come awake, come alive, almost provoked in a way like, wait a minute, I can live with nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one
Yeah.
we hear
Yeah. Give me a little bit of that.
over and over again. That's that church in Florida we were talking about. One of the men who had been exploring Heart of a Warrior said to the pastor, what if the men of our church could have nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear? What would their lives be like? And the pastor went, where did you hear that? And then that's how we got in this conversation.
And he said, where did you hear that? Because something in him resonated with that statement.
Yeah.
Right.
As a man. He said, I've been given authority over these men. They need to hear that too and
Right.
feel that resonation.
So how do you get there? How do you
Yeah,
get to where
so
nothing to hide,
when
nothing
I-
to prove, nothing to fear?
When I think about the first pillar here, or the first leg of the table, the 4 legs, Jim, I see intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God, the pursuit. I think about you. So just talk about that for a minute and the importance of it, and maybe even a little bit of how that looks in your life.
Well, I'm not sure my wife would agree with you, but first of all, what I have learned is it's not a head knowledge thing. It is a heart connection experience that takes, in an earlier podcast, we talked about the importance of stillness, of quietness, of listening. And that is something that we men, we're doers. We're not beers, human doings, not human beings. To just be still and be quiet and to create an environment where intimacy, oneness, and connectedness can happen does not come natural to us normally. It does not come natural to me. So what I have learned from you men and from this study and from this journey is the importance of taking time. For me, it's early in the morning, it's devotionals, it's walking. I don't run anymore, so walking is a great, great opportunity for me to have conversations and ask God questions and to listen to his responses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's good.
that's really good.
Jim, what I hear you say is it's hard. Everybody's lives are full or some are
Yeah,
busy, right?
sure.
So it's finding space for that in your life.
Yeah, intimacy doesn't happen in the drive-through. It doesn't happen in fifth gear. It doesn't
Yeah.
happen in the go, go, go. Intimacy is slower and slowing down my inner world.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a drawing too to that, Jim. You are drawn by the Lord into that.
Yeah.
Come by the still waters, restore your soul, like we see in Scripture.
Well, once you have a small taste of it, a small experience of it, then you
Right.
want more and
You
more
want
and more.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to take a swing at orientation, Greg?
Yeah, so who you are, where you are, and the good that God's up to in your life. I mean, I've hunted out west in Colorado, and you have topo maps and things like that, but you still always learn. One of the first thing is you pick a heading.
Yeah.
Where is that? I see that mountain right there. I'm going to keep that to my left or to my right, even though you have a topo map, to know where you're going. And so that's so important to this idea of orientation. And one of the things that we stay oriented by, it's back to intimacy, oneness, and connectedness with God. We stay oriented because we orient first to the Father, Holy Spirit, the Son, and then to each other. Because we know if we enjoy friendship one to another, we can know who we are, where we are, and the good that God's up to in our life. So that's where I'm drawn to with that, SJ.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways, Greg, I've been using that pillar is in this taking a moment between the stimulus and the response.
Yeah, you say
When my
that
wife
often. That's
says
good.
something that starts to trigger me, I say, wait a minute, who am I? I'm a child of God. Where am I? I'm in a spiritual battle here.
Mhm.
This is spiritual. It's not physical. And what is God up to in this? What is he trying to teach me in this particular situation? Then I'll respond
That's a huge one.
if I can do that.
What's he trying to teach me? Not
Yes.
show me to be right in this, God.
Right. How do I win this
one? Right.
Yeah. What are you showing my wife in this?
Yeah, I hear the marriage podcast coming on in the new year. But
Yeah.
the fruit of that intimacy, oneness, connectedness,
And
orientation.
who you are, where you are, and the good.
Yeah,
that God's
that's
up
what
to.
produces a
Right.
man that has nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear. And a man who is then living, walking, experiencing, and able then, because he is, share in the more life, more love, and more freedom of the kingdom. And this was our best swing at headlines, because all of these have resources and story and illustrations and more and more and more.
Yeah, this
But-
is an overview.
But what does wholeheartedness look like? It looks like those 4 pillars. It looks like the foundation of those things, the pursuit of those things, and the walking with God. And I love that you included hearing his voice. It's assumed, but let's say it, because
Yeah,
it's not well assumed in the Christian life right now.
With that, let me say this, because something that just occurred to me as I'm looking at this third pillar, nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to fear. You guys may have thought of this already, but it just occurred to me, okay, this is an opportunity for me to take an inventory. So where am I hiding? Where am I
Good.
proving? And where am I living in fear?
Right.
Yeah.
And when you start asking those questions, Jesus in his kindness and in his fierceness will show you the answers, where you're hiding, where you're
Yeah.
proving, and where you're living in fear.
Adds a whole other element to prayer. When prayer becomes conversational, it becomes, like you said, Jim, the opportunity to ask questions and to see God even differently than we ever did as fathering us, realizing we're part of these statistics in some way, shape, or form. They have been true in our lives, and we have been men in recovery, in restoration, in renovation. And that's where we found this is our strategy for others. This is what God's entrusting to us to bring to the hearts and lives of others. And the podcast is just one of those ways. Do we talk like this with the microphones off and around?
All the time.
It's the kind of conversations we have, as well as fantasy football and, where are we going to have dinner and let's get together as couples and so many things. But I'm praying continually that we don't have to be the exceptions. We have friends who get to live this way, who aren't full-time missionaries, full-time ministry. It's not just because we're in the full-time ministry world that this is the way a man's life can be. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this isn't an invitation, listeners, for you to join ministry.
Mission impossible.
I mean, this is an invitation for you to live this way.
Right.
It's an invitation to a life that Jesus has promised that's available to every single one of us.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah, and there's so many stories. I mean, I recently been talking with one of the chaplains at Fort Hood, and he came on this message through YouVersion, and then he's picked up a book via Amazon. I wanted to jump, Michael, to how do we do this at Fort Hood, which is, I think, the largest military base in the United States. But God gave me pause and said, let's just talk about his heart. And that's what the last several weeks has been about.
Yeah.
It's been about his heart. So as we look and talk about the vision now, SJ, and I think about, well, how does the vision reach men at that base? We can't reach them without his heart being impacted first.
Yeah, I think about Jesus's declaration, I came to seek and save that which is lost.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost.
Yeah.
How do we recover what's been
How do we reform the lines?
what's
like
been
we talked
stolen?
about? Right.
If John 10:10 is true, and we believe it with all our heart, he came that we might have life. The first part of that is the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so that, as the enemy has done that over decades, over hundreds of years, but particularly in our generation, as he's done that, we see the kingdoms, small k kingdoms that men have been so infiltrated, compromised, assaulted in such ways that their influence, their authority, even within their own children. And I'm not indicting anybody. I'm saying it's what the enemy does, as you read.
The product.
It's how he works, how they work, and how when your false self is prevalent, your kingdom is in big trouble. How do you get that off of you? How do you get that untangled? That is only a work of God, in the presence of God, and hopefully within some environments that are trying to create that space, which is part of our vision for the new year, is to create as many of those spaces as we are capable of. But like you said, Jim, it's not just a weekend. It's trying to invite people into a space where it's magnified in a weekend so that they can take it home and live that way. So time alone with God at our weekends, would you guys agree that's the magic? That's the marquee?
Absolutely.
That's the significant thing. We hear all the time about people hearing from God in those weekends.
And we experience it.
And we experience it.
No doubt.
And once you experience it, you want more of
More
it.
of that. Yeah.
No doubt.
Exactly. So I think for a strategy in the new year, that's just part of it, to create more environments where people can connect with God. And the books, Greg, right? It's not about the book. I hear you say that all the time, but it is about the book, because the book creates an environment, a quiet environment for you to explore kingdom ways with God.
Right.
There's some solitude to that. Yeah, you're reading, but through that process, that's different than a weekend environment, but it's still an environment.
Yeah, and it's what we like to say, Jim, is our best shot to help men in their small groups to really connect with God. But it's not about the book, because it is about that relationship with Jesus and what Jesus wants to say to you. But we believe that the book will help that to happen. And it has for us.
Yeah.
What has been going on for so many years is that there have been conferences and events where men have the mountaintop experience. They're at the weekend retreat that they go on, and then they go back home and they fall back into their old routines, or nothing really changes after a while. It wears off.
Yeah.
What we're proposing is that you can take that weekend environment that's a mountaintop experience, and yes, that's how it's experienced at the Encounter weekends as well. It is a mountaintop experience, but you can stay up there even when you go home.
That's right.
Right.
You can create the environment when you go home. You can continue to live differently the way you did and the way you experienced it at that weekend.
Yeah, the Psalm even says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. So when you have to descend into that kind of
preparing
thing,
a table,
before me, in the presence of my
presence of my enemies,
anointing my head with oil.
I mean, yeah.
My cup runneth
Amen.
over. I
Yeah,
mean, it's so
yeah.
good.
Yeah, that is the key, though, I think. And it's what's different about what we're doing. We are proposing that you don't have to just come once a year and that's the only time you get to experience intimacy with God. Now, we want to invite you into that, and you get trained to be able to experience that day to day throughout your life.
Yeah, and we're not the only ones doing it. I know you're not saying that, but
I'm not, but I'm saying we're doing it pretty darn
remnant,
well.
Right? There's this
There is a remnant.
there's this crowd of rebels, and some are carrying the banner for us that we learned and entrusted then the banner to us so that we could help engage the hearts and lives of men. And now we have this conversation just the other day. We were entrusted with some keys to the kingdom, and now we're being entrusted to cut keys
Yeah.
and to offer these keys that will unlock doors of riches and
Generations, we
and
hope.
see families restored and see relationships brought back together. It's one of our favorite things to bear witness to. It's so holy and so good. We just got an email from our friend Craig, and without going into the detail, literally, I believe this with all my heart, that the Thanksgiving that he and his family had started about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. It was
Oh,
very
yeah. I know the
special
one you're talking about. Yeah.
And what happened
Yep.
in their family
with his
around a
dad.
table with his father and brothers. I mean, this is cousins and aunts and uncles and all. You know, it's not surprising, but it doesn't make it any less amazing or holy
Such a
when
gift.
we hear stories like that. To him 4 years ago, if you'd have given him a snapshot of what's going to happen Thanksgiving 2019, he'd have said, "There's no way."
Yeah, I was just saying, those are the
There's
exact
no
words
way.
in his voice. There's no way. You know, he's got a
deep
deep
voice.
In a
voice. I get
way,
it.
our secret sauce, if you will, I know that sounds corny, but our secret sauce is two things. There's more than two things, but at least two things. One is the message that we've just talked about with 4 pillars. The other is the method, which is this redemptive community, which is these deep friendships that grow over time that help to experience the message. The
Yeah.
message needs to be experienced, not just intellectually understood.
Right.
Exactly. It's a good
That's where
point, Jeff.
reinforcements come. That's where we recover from past, but we are living in the present. And we know that in any moment, God can literally turn things to look back at what happened. And I think after a few years, Greg, it seems like 2, sometimes 3 years, I am getting to then live less in my past
Right.
because I've gotten healing. I want to just extend to our friends and allies out there that that's our hope. God has put a real mission, vision, strategy on our hearts, and we want you to consider coming with us, partnering with us. It's a round table. It's a movement that he seems to be entrusting us to be on point, but we won't go to war. We won't see this thing through without a larger and larger number of men and women getting their hearts back, getting healing, and through the healing of their walk with God, the personal healing, there's training that comes from that. And through that training, God is going to father us with initiation, validation, and then deploy us into a landscape where there are more in the water, more pinned down, more in POW counts. And I know that it sounds like we're being quite emphatic on this military and war type. Get over it. It's the truth.
Right.
I'm not apologizing.
No.
What we just talked about, the condition of things, we have lost such ground in the faith initiative, and I'm tired of it. If the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, if that's true, and we believe it is, then we're seeing the results of that.
If you're not angry about it or hurt about it, you might want to do an inventory right now.
Yeah, and if you want to talk more
See
about
clearly.
it, Hey, that's what we love talking about, but we love talking more about the hope, restoration,
So,
and the
Michael,
recovery.
we want to create environments in 2020, more environments, right? To
Mhm.
see more freedom, more life, more love, and more freedom. Books, resources, things of that nature, of course. What are some of those things that are coming up?
Yeah, Heart of a Warrior continues to move in some incredible places. I think when we are engaging with allies, you two know, Jim and Greg, we were on the phone with a younger man, 30s, because he's wanting to start something. And we said, well, how would you feel about being an outpost in your area? And he said, I like it. What is it? Right? What is one?
That's right.
What if we could point men towards what you're going to do in the new year? You know, do what you're going to do, invite men from your church and your community. But what if within our database, people who have registered their books, people who have been alumni at conferences, I think there was 45, 50 guys in his area, 20-mile radius. He had no idea.
Right. Of course, he took it back to his pastor. His pastor's like, yeah.
Let's be an outpost. But still, it's relational and trying to not get the agenda in front of the friendship, but let the friendship drive the agendas. And that's the hard thing that we get to work in. But the two new resources, the marriage resource, the book for men, King Me, the book for women called More, those things are going to be helpful, I think, in the battle. And then the environments that they're going to invite people to, Greg, you know, that's a big part of our vision. Hungry and thirsty seem to find the living water and the bread of life as they knock and ask and seek. That's how it works.
Right.
So, Greg, those are just some of the initiatives, some of the resources that we're going to try to put into play, into the war, into the battle, into the game for the hearts of men and women. And there's a lot more to talk about vision, and we're going to do that at a later.
Yeah, we'll probably do that next week. We'll talk about, you know, our vision that God has given us for 2020, the numbers of men that we're hoping to reach, men, women, couples. What's our strategy, what the mission needs, you know, what the vision needs. We'll get into that more in depth.
And I would love to say that, man, we got together and came up with this.
Right. It was more like we plugged in and got downloaded.
It's like,
you know?
I remember asking God, so here we are, October. God, what do you have for us in the new year? What's next? And there was some well done and rest, and you guys are pretty bruised and you fought hard. And, you know, I thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Thank you. And then he said, so there's a lot more. There's a lot more out there. There's a lot more hurting.
There's way more hills to climb.
And began to show us some of the hills.
And
that's
God
where
gave some visions. And he gave some instruction, time alone. And not just to you, Michael, but to all of us, you know?
Yeah. What would it look like to see 1 million men oriented with those 4 pillars?
Yeah.
What would that look like? And Jesus, how long would it take? And look at how message can move in this day and age through all the technology. What's needed between now and then? You know, to see 1 million men oriented. Jesus was showing us more and more the men that he's going to
Here's some battle plans.
Empower, and the men that he's going to partner with to see 1 million men, 1 million families, 1 million marriages. What's 2020 look like in order to get from here to that space? And that's what we're going to talk about on another podcast because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt. Listeners, thanks for joining us for this episode. Thank you, Jim and Greg, for being here again with us. Michael, man, it's been fun. Man, this was fun. I love how riled up we were. I can't wait to go back up and listen to it. But if you got questions for us, our email is exploringmore@zoweh.org. Check out what's going on, all the things that are going on with Zoweh at zoweh.org. You can take a look at our newsletters and some resources that we've got available to you there. But we're so thankful to be maybe a part of your lives and what God is doing in it. We're excited that you are along with us. Looking forward to being with you again next week because there's more to explore.
Until then, blessings, courage, continue exploring. We'll see you next time. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.